Welcome back to Skeptical 2024. I'm Carolyn Doherty, and I'm excited to be hosting our next panel, Media Literacy and the TikTok Generation. Many of us know that millennials and Gen Z are getting most of their news and information from social media platforms, but they're getting a lot of misinformation there as well. For example, in May, the New York Times reported that many young adults falsely believe that skin cancer is caused by sunscreen and that just staying hydrated will prevent sunburn. This nonsense was widely promoted by so-called influencers on TikTok and other platforms. So, what can be done to help combat this problem? Well, we need effective science communicators who are able to attract a following on social media, and we need to share the best practices for how to reach the younger generations. Fortunately, we have awesome science communicators who are also popular on social media here with us today. Physicist Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki is the Dean of Australian Science Communicators, well known from his decades of appearances on Australian television and radio, and online social media such as YouTube and TikTok, in addition to a weekly podcast. He was awarded the UNESCO Kalinga Prize for the Popularization of Science and has over 500,000 followers on TikTok. Biologist Dr. Melanie Trecek-King is a science communicator and a college professor who created the Thinking is Power website. She is the Director of Communications for the Mental Immunity Project and appears on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. A popular speaker, she has appeared at SciCon and several other skeptical conferences, has spoken for Skeptical Inquirer Presents, and has written for Skeptical Inquirer magazine. Last, and certainly not least, and bringing a generational perspective to our panel, is biological anthropology PhD student Erica Matthews, whose YouTube channel Gutsick Gibbon explains evolution, primatology, and the errors of creation science and other pseudosciences. Her videos regularly receive over 100,000 views. Welcome to Skeptical, all of you. I'd like to start off with each of you giving us an elevator pitch for your primary projects and how you utilize social media for them. So Melanie, would you like to go first?
Sure. First of all, I am so honored to be here, and oh my goodness, with such great fellow panelists. So my pet project is Thinking is Power. So I spent years teaching general education biology at a college, and I love biology. I'm a biologist. And I finally realized that my students were just going to memorize everything that I was trying to teach them and regurgitate it on an exam and then leave probably hating science as much as when they came to me. And that's such a shame because science is such a powerful way of knowing. And so I asked myself, if I had a single semester to teach the average person what they needed to know about science, what would that look like? And so to my college's credit, they let me cancel biology and replace it with a course that teaches skills. So critical thinking, information literacy, and science literacy in that order. And we could talk more about that later if you like. But in the process, I wanted my students to read, like there was no textbook available for them. And so I thought, well, I'll just create a website and make the content available to them. And the idea with Thinking is Power was that, I mean, we've all heard knowledge is power, but there's just too much to know. And we carry access to basically all of humanity's knowledge in our pockets, but also misinformation. So the question is, when someone needs reliable information, can they find it and use it to make better decisions? So I created Thinking is Power. And in the process, like my students over the years taught me so much. They taught me what students know, what they don't know, and how to craft a message so that they might hear it. And so I use like cat jokes. Anybody who knows me knows that my cat is almost as famous as I am. I'm famous, you know. He's adorable. He's way cuter than I am. Who uses, I like fart jokes. It doesn't have to be stuffy. Like critical thinking is so important. And there's so many great resources for people who are at a level where they have an interest in it, but most people just don't care and they have better things to do with their time. And so I was trying to figure out a way to make it fun and colorful and use silly fonts and fun graphics. And so I created Thinking is Power. And here we are.
Well, thank you. And I'm very thankful for that website, by the way. Erica, would you like to tell us about your little elevator pitch? And
more than anything, absolutely. Yeah, so my name is Erica. I run a YouTube channel called Gutsick Gibbon, and I'm also on Twitter, same name. And basically, I think the best way to sort of explain the channel and like where I was coming from with it, especially initially, is to talk about like the inception of it. So I was finishing up my undergraduate career, and I was pre-vet at the time. I was planning on being a veterinarian, and so I was on that track, and I was picking up a couple of last minute credits. And I had this job at the time where I was working at an animal clinic. Like I was a veterinary assistant. And I had this coworker who was just like this fervent young earth creationist, right? And he would come to work and kind of like give us his thoughts on just about everything under the sun. You know, soft tissue and dinosaur fossils was a favorite of his. And you know, if it's an Answers in Genesis article, he was giving us the TLDR while we were at work. And you know, I'd push back on him because I'd gotten a minor in anthropology and then another minor in biology during my undergraduate career. So like I had a cursory knowledge of things like human evolution and the like. But it kind of occurred to me while I was going toe to toe with him that a lot of the things that he was saying, I knew they were incorrect or being misrepresented, but I didn't know why they were, right? Like things like, how do we know radiometric dating works? Or how do we know that the soft tissue, quote unquote, that we find in dinosaur fossils is not a challenge to the ancient age of the earth? Or how do we know that the fossil record is reliable? And so I started kind of falling down these rabbit holes. And in doing so, I stumbled across like Reddit threads and YouTube channels of people who were tackling the same questions. And I kind of thought to myself, you know what, running into some of these questions that I was doing a lot of legwork of research for and delving into literature in areas that I wasn't familiar with, which means I had to learn the basics of things like geology and chemistry again. And I realized, like, you know, if I'm going to the trouble to document this, to do this work, other people should benefit from that. They should be able to get these answers and have these resources without having to take, you know, dozens of hours of their day and looking it up for themselves. And me and this coworker ended up actually getting coffee once a month, and we would kind of litigate this the status of science between the two of us, which I tried to, you know, friendly reminder for him was like, you know, us having this conversation has absolutely zero bearing on the scientific community at large, as fun as this might be. So eventually that boiled down to me saying, okay, well, I'm going to make a YouTube channel. Like I think this information needs to be easily accessible. And more importantly, it needs to be digestible. It needs to be understandable in a way that your average person can, first of all, understand and comprehend, which I think is framing it in a way of like, hey, I just had to figure this out for myself. So allow me to sort of take you down the same rabbit hole. But second, it needs to be entertaining, right? Like we have to make this stuff entertaining for people, especially for younger folks. Like, you know, I'm 28, people my age and my sister's age and younger, people who have a short attention span, and even those who have a longer attention span, but like just want something, they want to learn about the hominin fossil record without being bored to tears. And you know, that's crazy to me that anybody could be, because it's just such a wonderful, awe-inspiring part of our history. But not everybody loves biology the same way that we do, right? So it has to be sexy, it has to be interesting, and it has to be filled with memes. And so my sort of strategy with that was I started on YouTube with videos, and I started with like, you know, debating, having discussions with these people, and basically saying like, yeah, like let's hash this out. And people who are watching can see what it's like for somebody who had, you know, has a background in this to talk to somebody who oftentimes doesn't, and can get answers to the types of questions that are really snappy and quick, that people like the Discovery Institute or Answers in Genesis or Institute for Creation Research like to throw out there. And you know, young Earth creationism is my specialty as far as like going toe to toe and creationism generally on the channel. But you could do this. The same logic holds for vaccine denial, right? Or climate change denial, or any of these pseudoscientific ideas, where it's like our best chance at combating this is digestible information that is entertaining. And the reason I sort of pick young Earth creationism as like my punching bag here is because I think it's a gateway conspiracy. I think it's a conspiracy that a lot of people swallow. And you know, if you doubt the scientific community on things like the age of the Earth or the shape of the Earth or, you know, evolutionary theory, you're much more likely to fall for some of these other, you know, arguably much more nefarious conspiracy theories like, you know, vaccines and climate change. And so then on the side, I also try to take what I'm learning in my degree, and I'm a fourth year PhD candidate these days. So it's like I have the privilege to work with incredibly intelligent people, like way out of my league, and hear the work that they're doing and see the papers that they publish. And all of it's behind a paywall. And, I want that accessible to everybody. So I try to make it my personal business to take the new cool information in my field in primatology and biological anthropology and make it fun and interesting to, somebody who doesn't really like peruse the literature, if you will. So that's my my elevator pitch of 5 minutes or however long I just took. I told you I'm a little long-winded. I love to talk about this stuff.
That's fine. And Dr. Karl, we'd love to hear about your elevator pitch and your primary projects that we see on social media.
Okay, look, just to give you an intro to myself. So I started off as a physicist, but I'm also qualified as an engineer and a medical doctor, and I have 16 years of university education in total. And I've worked in all of those fields, as well as a TV weatherman, had TV shows, shooting a new TV show now, 10 radio shows every week, science, Q&As, test drove 4, drives through the Australian output, back for a quarter of a century, etc. And been to Antarctica 7 times. But getting to the core of it, the core is that science, and this is a quote from Richard Feynman, science is a way to not get fooled. So with regard to the topic of media literacy and the TikTok generation, firstly, I always see my audience as a 10-year-old of average intelligence, but with a sense of curiosity. And if they don't have the sense of curiosity, you're stuffed, you can't do anything. And you can't assume any knowledge. We all have different areas of ignorance. The second thing is that you, according to the old Chinese proverb, you can't wake a man who is pretending to be sleeping. And so if you've got a baked in the wall young earther, nothing you will do will make any difference, although following the words of the great Catherine Hayhoe, if somebody's listening, you might influence them. Getting specifically to TikTok, the latest figures over the last few days are that 50 to 70% of the people on TikTok get their medical information from social media, overwhelmingly including TikTok. Secondly, another survey showed that 2% of the medical information on TikTok is correct. 98% is incorrect. So having been a medical doctor, that gives me a bit of an understanding there. I did my very first story on science in 1981, probably before some of you were born, about this thing called the greenhouse effect and how already the insurance companies thought it was real and were charging extra, but the scientists weren't convinced and the research was just ramping up at the moment. And so I've just been following it, and that's for over 40 years. I got into TikTok a fair while ago, but what really inspired me to keep on going was a study that showed that in the early days of COVID, in the first half hour of going on any TikTok session, which, by the way, doom scrolling is real, you get sucked in, don't do it, that in the first half hour of each session, 70% of them would, females aged 13 to 19, would be told lies about COVID and the COVID vaccine. And so I followed that. As you can tell, I'm a plagiarizer. Another good saying, which is that all it is needed for evil to triumph is that good people do nothing. So I went in there, boots and all. And so I'm doing TikTok and I'm keeping my X/Twitter thing. So I've been getting all sorts of terrible insults, which was reported to the TikTok mother station, including racial stuff. And TikTok Central says, no, we don't see that as a problem at all. That's not bad. But I'm specifically keeping TikTok, but don't tell anybody. Sorry, rather X or Twitter, because I've got a secret project.
Ooh.
And my secret project is to use AI as a force for good. Now, I do 10 radio shows every week and people ring in with questions, and most of the time I just have to do it off the top of my head. Occasionally I have a bit of a time and I can just check with Twitter or Perplexity, not Twitter, with ChatGPT. Here's what I found. 70% of the time, my brain, with its 16 years of university education and 48 books, is better than Perplexity or ChatGPT. 5% of the time, it suggests something that I had completely forgotten about, because as new knowledge comes in, old knowledge gets pushed out, or it comes up with something I hadn't thought of. I thought, wow, that's fucking great. And then 25% of the time, it very confidently lies like a pig in its own shit. And so there was the story of radiation, and there's always radiation going through you. And as an example, talk about 5G radiation. As an example, 1%, if you get a TV and you tune it slightly off from the channel, you'll get static. 1% of that static is radiation left over from the Big Bang going through your body. So radiation is always part of our lives, has been through all of evolutionary history. I thought I'd just check the figure. Is it 1% or 3%? Perplexity said 1%. ChatGPT said, nah, there's nothing to do with the Big Bang in the static on a TV. So if you've got people in the now generation trying to look at an AI for advice, thinking I'm doing the right thing, about 1/4 of the time they'll be lied to. Hence our topic today, media literacy and TikTok. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And all of you, I just want to thank you in more than one way, because you've touched on questions that the Skeptical Community Committee came up with in your introduction. So that is awesome. So yay. Erica, you already talked to us about what makes an effective science communicator, and all of you talked about how you transpose that to social media. And I thank you for all that, because one of the most important things that you each touched on is you have to make it digestible for people like me. I don't have a formal science background. I got to university on a music scholarship. So, so the fact that you guys can make this not just digestible, but attractive to someone like me and interesting, I just thank you all for that. And this goes to any one of you, could you compare the different styles of the major platforms? Between, there's differences between Facebook versus YouTube versus TikTok, X, and then Instagram, which a lot of us don't get. I don't seem to get. Do you use a different approach for your content on these different platforms?
Anyone? So I'll kick it off. Just because I do YouTube, right? So I'm sure my fellow panel members here, like both of you, have a presence on TikTok if memory serves, or other short form like Instagram Reels, things like that. For myself, right? Like I'm long winded. You could tell from my opener, right? Like I can't shut up about something when I really want to talk about it. And one of those topics, of course, is like I am slack-jawed by how cool the evolutionary history leading to anatomically modern Homo sapiens is. I love that. I think it's wonderful. I love to inspire that same wonder. That's my goal, is to inspire that same wonder in other people. But because of that, so YouTube is very friendly to longer form content. And so specifically, weirdly enough, the kind of avenue, my kind of niche, if you will, that I've wormed myself into is longer form content that is kind of humorous, right? That you can put on while you're doing other stuff. Right, so a debate analysis I might do, or tackling somebody else's pseudoscientific video I might do, or like a long video on the history of what we know about Neanderthals and how we know it. That's kind of the area that I've got. So it's interesting that we're talking about media literacy in the TikTok generation, which when I think of TikTok I think short form. But the niche that I've sort of cornered for myself is significantly more long form, and I think there's a place for both. There has to be short form content that explains the concept briefly, correctly, most importantly, and then also directs you ideally to a place where you can learn more, right? You can only teach so much in a minute and a half. So TikTok is sort of your perfect entryway into so many different topics, which is why it's so important as a tool for science communication. But then I think it's also important to have that longer form stuff, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, of videos that break things down, like PBS Eons is one that comes to mind that I quite like for that. So for me, longer form content is where I thrive, and that's especially important to have content be digestible and entertaining, because you're trying to get someone to stick around for the whole thing. So it's got to be punchy, it's got to be fun the whole time. And that's what I try to do on my channel, at least.
I think you succeed. I enjoy your channel.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to comment? Please.
Yeah, I go for a variety of forms, Erica. So I start off in old school with radio. So I'm doing that in half-hour and 1-hour radio shows around the world. Books, I've written 48 of those. Social media, Twitter and TikTok, and they both have their own strengths. Facebook, I'm heading away from. My producer handles the Insta feed. And the podcast, I've got the Triple J podcast, which is Q&A, and then a long form podcast as well. And I think you need to, as you get everything from the short form to the long form, what I've followed is an ancient, very simple formula always, which is 3 parts, because everything comes in threes, like 3 days of the week, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, according to the country and western song, each one worse than the one before it, or 3 sides of a triangle, whatever. So you start off with a hook to grab them in. Then you give them a story, an explanation, which makes them feel smarter, and everybody loves that. And then finally, you finish off with a joke, and then you're out. And you need the short form and you need the long form, because the beauty of the long form goes back to the saying by Edgar Allan Poe. No, who was it? He said, what is it? A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Alexander Pope, sorry. He said, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and everybody knows that first sentence. What they don't know are the next 3 sentences, which go that a shallow draft will intoxicate you. So you get a little bit of knowledge and you think, oh my God, I know everything there is about it. But then he says, drink deeper of the Pierian spring. So a Pierian spring was something in Pieria in Macedonia where he gives the religious people some money, you drink the water, there's some hallucinogens, you have a good time, everybody's happy. Drink deeper of the Pierian spring, because a deep draft will make you sober again. So you need the short term to plant the seed. But the thing that, Erica, you're doing, the long form, that really plants it if they can hang around for long enough, and not everybody can. But
exactly.
Because then the conversion is in their own mind, not just because you've given them a decent explanation. Melanie?
Yeah, I'm just learning from the two of you because you're so much better at this than I am. I started with my website, and then my goal was just to get people to my website. And so I started with Facebook, and spent quite a bit of time in Facebook jail because its algorithms can't distinguish between misinformation and trying to address and debunk misinformation. But in the process, like I'm with you, Carolyn, I hate Instagram. I cannot figure it out for the life of me. And to me, a lot of what I'm trying to do is to send people to my website, and I just can't figure out how to do that on Instagram. So Facebook is my biggest platform. I mean, I know it's for like mostly older people, but there's a lot of people on Facebook, and it allows me to communicate messages in a variety of different ways. Some of them are just memes. Some of them are videos, short videos, long videos. I can send people to my website. It's a constant struggle.
Well, I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Dr. Karl, you mentioned briefly before about the amount of misinformation, especially medical information that we find on social media. And we talked about that yesterday in Jeannie's panel about pre-bunking fake news and stuff, that we're outnumbered, right, on social media. So are any of you currently mentoring or teaching future science communicators to kind of, I don't know, build an army? Yes, Dr. Karl?
Okay, I'll start off. So firstly, I'm doing an awful lot of mentoring, getting people to take over my show. So if you listen to my various shows, when I'm not there, I normally get female science communicators to take over. Then secondly, what we need to do is what the military call force multiplication. So all you can do is be one person against another. And this concept came to me when I was reading an article about OnlyFans. You guys familiar with OnlyFans? Yeah. So the thing is, apparently, if you go onto OnlyFans, no matter when you talk to them, they're there, and they'll talk to you, and then gradually they'll inveigle you into buying or subscribing to something that they just recorded half an hour ago, only for you. And these are bots that in this case are people. There's a large army of people, surprisingly, many of them from Venezuela, who have good English literature. There was an article about this in Wired. And so they're there 24 hours a day to keep the fans from keep the fans from OnlyFans happy. So that started me thinking about using an AI. So so I'm keeping Twitter/X going. On one hand, it's turned into an absolute sludge pitch, and I have to pay somebody $200 a week to keep it clean and get rid of all of the people coming in who just try to clutter it up with a denial service attack, right? But I'm keeping it going because there are people I engage in conversation with, and if you're there for long enough, you can do something with them. So the concept is, and I'm working with some clever people in AI, to develop AI agents that will respond to each person based on their psychology. So it's going to do some snooping on their homepage and who they are, and then answer them questions in a reasonable manner 24 hours a day, all the time, and be always there for them. That is a difficult project because I was reading an article just about 2 weeks ago where if you teach people different forms of media literacy and how to deal with misinformation, in some cases, you'll make them skeptical of the media that's telling the truth. Right? So that's why I'm in this case, besides hooking up with, this is my next project, besides hooking up with AI people, I want to hook up with psychologists. Because you've got to know how not to turn them off. And as somebody said, we all have different areas of ignorance. So I give talks, and there's somebody who is like a world expert on dark matter. They don't know anything about decoupling of oxidative phosphorylation. And we all have different areas of ignorance. So that's why I always assume zero knowledge and a sense of curiosity in a 10-year-old brain. Erica, Melanie?
And you mentioned too about the AI, and I saw an article I think last week from NewsGuard that there are content farms putting out slick videos. Their AI content forms putting out slick videos with disinformation and false information, etc. And I'm so glad that you mentioned, because one of my questions previously would have been, how do we use AI for our benefit? To do the same thing, to put out reliable content. And so it's just exciting that you're working with that. So that's great. And another thing, go ahead, Eric.
No, I was going to say, sorry, the delay made me think there was like a pause. I was going to say, I totally agree. When Dr. Karl first started talking about AI, I was like, oh man, I'm wary of AI because I'm just wary of it. It can be a great tool, but it's being used for nefarious purposes all over the place. But then as I listened to you talk, and I started kind of mulling it over, and your OnlyFans example is actually quite apt. It's like if you have this service, these bots that are constantly patrolling, climate change denial pages or vaccine denial pages or whatever, that are ready to then and there, every time these jerks, for lack of better term, sometimes, post their misinformation, and you've got somebody who's like, sorry, bozo, here's the science, rip to your grandma, but we're built different. Here's your citations, your list of citations that show, yes, in fact, the climate is changing, or yes, in fact, the efficacy of vaccines or whatever, because they thrive so much on just baffling people with bullshit and just throwing so much nonsense to the wall to see what sticks. And we're all familiar with the Gish Gallop, which is where these guys live, right? They say so much nonsense in such a short amount of time that you would be there all day debunking it all. And I'm a sucker. My strategy on Twitter is I get in fights with people 24/7. I'm fighty on Twitter. I brawl with anybody, even when it's obviously bait. I still get into it because I like to fight and I like to argue. But an AI
He's
tool
from New York or
fix
something.
that. An AI tool would be so incredible for me, because then I could show up and it's not me versus 100 4chan bots. It's me and my 50 cool good science bots that are shoveling data at them, burying them with data until they have to basically just put their hands up and say, well, I believe this because I want to, not because it's actually supported.
Although, let me pick you up on one word: you use the word believe. Now, in our School of Physics, we've got a person who, on one hand, is probably the top relativist in the Southern Hemisphere, relativity. On the other hand, he's also a minister of religion. And they both work in the same brain. So belief is a word that I've gone out of my way to not use, simply because if you look up the dictionary definition, belief means that you accept something with zero proof.
Right.
So when he's a minister of religion, he accepts all the religious stuff without any proof at all. But when he's a scientist, he accepts the science. So, and in that case, belief has got nothing. So I see religion and science as two orthogonal or right-angled streams that don't intersect, and they can both exist comfortably in the same brain. But I tend to avoid just the word believe and say I accept the science of.
Right.
I actually, so I used to think the same thing, and I now use the word belief. The philosophers have convinced me. So belief in most of their definitions is something that you accept as true. And so when trying to discern if something is a belief or knowledge, so knowledge is a subset of belief for which we have it's true and there's good justifications for it. But the problem is discerning something that you have good justifications for something that you don't have good justifications for. And that's a really hard thing. And so even this idea of certainty, or like, I feel like I know something, that certainty is a feeling. It doesn't necessarily come from actual reasons. And actually, Erica, you mentioned something about like, well, finally, they're just going to have to admit this is something they want to believe. And to me, that's the thing. Oh, and I'm just going to come back and quote all of you, because Dr. Karl, the Feynman quote is my favorite quote, and is one that basically it's behind all of my communications. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Mm-hmm. So to me, the real power here is in helping people understand what they think is true, and do have good reasons for that. And so a lot of these science communication efforts, and Carolyn, you're just going to have to shut me up at this point, because this is one of my things I'm super fiery about. A lot of these science communication efforts focus on the end result, like people don't accept evolution, or they don't accept climate change or vaccines or whatever it is. And all of that are important things to address. But as science communicators, for a long time, we've operated under the information deficit model. They don't believe it because they just don't have all the information. So you just need to give them all of the information, and when they have it, they will accept it. But that's not true. Most of the time, these forms of denial are motivated by some kind of identity issue, by a desire to believe or not believe based on like not wanting the consequences of accepting something. Whatever it is, throwing facts at somebody is not going to address it. We have to understand what might be motivating their search for evidence and facts. And only then can we help them try and accept this science better. So for me, when I spent a lot of time in helping students understand the science, and I just, over time, I realized that I needed to drill down. And so I actually don't even call myself a science communicator most of the time. I like to call myself a critical thinking communicator. And in that, what I mean is helping students understand their belief systems, understand what they want or don't want to believe, understand the nature of evidence, how to evaluate evidence, but trying to do so in a way that is true to, that is an awareness. It's a metacognitive awareness in their search for understanding. And so all of these efforts, even with AI and so on, and we're talking about like the TikTok channel. Why do people fall for these things on TikTok? I have absolutely no say over the kinds of things that get published on TikTok, over the algorithms, any of those things. The only thing that I can help people do is understand what they bring to those platforms and why they might fall for something, the value of skepticism. Like, wait a minute, is this true? Do I want this to be true? Let's think about this a bit more. And so to me, the empowerment lies in helping them understand their own thinking and motivations in trying to come to what might be true.
And if I can piggyback off of that, because you just sparked something that reminded me of a question that we talked about before. There was a neuroscientist who did some studies, and she discussed a survey that when asked if it's okay to fudge information for more clicks, the number of people who answered yes has increased quite a bit from 15 years ago. So going back to the whole belief and why we believe and what motivates us and behavior, what can we do about this normalizing effect of misinformation? Do you guys have any advice or ideas of what we could do? Dr. Karl.
I got some advice about half a century ago, which was still very good. Ignore opinions, stick to the facts. In the long term, it'll work out better. In the short term, you can get a whole lot of people following you and worshipping you, and who knows, you might fool them for 10 or 20 years. Long term, stick to the facts. Erica, Melanie?
Yeah, I think that the problem, it's a skill issue. To use some Gen Z language here, it's a skill issue. The facts are sexy, the facts are cool, and the facts have value. So while it may be true that you can inflate it to get more clicks if you want to, as Dr. Karl said, the truth is evergreen. That's going to stay good. And so the people that you bring in using the truth, that's the kind of audience that you actually want to cultivate. That's the kind of people who you want to see your stuff and who are then going to disseminate correct information to people in their lives. And if I may, I want to touch on something Melanie said a minute ago, just because it's a lesson that I have learned the hard way. I was that person for a very long time who was like, and in my science communication efforts as well, it's only been very recently that I figured out that, yeah, you can give everybody the data that they need, but if they don't want to know, they're not going to know, right? You can't bury them with data. That's not actually an effective science communication or persuasive strategy to just throw as much literature as you can at them. It might impress somebody who's watching from the sideline, but you're never going to convince somebody that way. It's not always the case that they just haven't been shown the right evidence. And I have to be honest, when I learned that lesson over and over and over again, and it finally sunk in, it kind of broke my heart a little bit. That sucks. And you're right. Like there is a necessity for us to dig deeper than just the surface level. You know, again, I work with evolution denial primarily, but this goes for every conspiracy theory out there. It's more than just here's the data that proves I'm right. It's also digging down and asking, why is it that you believe the way that you believe? Because you're right, it goes much deeper than at least I had previously appreciated, and I'm only just beginning to kind of learn strategies to navigate that.
The other thing that a couple of you actually touched on, and I know we're trying to get more science communicators and critical thinking communicators out there. I've had this question from several skeptics. When they see misinformation on a social media platform, some of them are afraid to engage because of the algorithms. The more you engage with content, it pushes up the visibility, and they're hesitant. What is your advice to them?
If you walk past somebody hitting somebody else, you implicitly approve of it. You have to speak up.
Like I said, I'm fighty on Twitter, but you gotta push back on it to some degree, I think. Sorry, I interrupted you, Melanie. Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Melanie, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I guess it depends. It depends on who is sharing it and what it is. So, like, if this is a person for whom the relationship matters to you, I might say don't address it publicly, private message them. Because when we are publicly faced with evidence that we're wrong, especially if this is something that is tied to our identity, then we're just going to fight back to preserve our ego and not necessarily for the sake of truth. And so you might get further by doing it privately. Mm-hmm. This is just a site that is sharing something that's not true. I would again probably engage, and even publicly, but likely not for the sake of the person who is sharing the misinformation.
Right.
There's a lot of people who are watching, the spectators. Erica, you alluded to that. There's a lot of people who are watching, but aren't directly involved in the conversation. And so by putting something out there that is a better reflection of what we know from the science, and not only explaining factually why something is wrong, but maybe explaining the techniques that are being used to mislead, then that can help people sort through that misinformation and not fall for it. And also, again, for the vast majority of people who aren't involved in the conversation.
So I want to kind of tack something onto that, because, again, I always bring it back to like the thing that I know, which is evolution education. And I think that for a long time, the scientific community, like big S scientific community, their strategy, at least with that, was these guys don't know what they're talking about. Obviously, they're incorrect. And so we'll just ignore them, because to engage with them, to deign to engage with them is to give them validity. But I think that strategy has kind of backfired in the long run. I think it's allowed some of these pseudoscientific wounds to fester, and it's allowed these echo chambers to become larger and larger and larger, because they get into that conspiratorial thinking of, well, the scientists aren't talking to these people that we believe because they don't have anything to say. They know that they're wrong, and so because of that, we're validated, right? This is true in young Earth creationism and climate change analysis, especially the flat Earth community. Unless the NASA scientists personally drive to some random flat Earther's house and sit them down and talk to them, the reason that they won't engage is because they're scared. That's the kind of attitude that they foster. And so, I'm with Dr. Karl here. Like, I make a spectacle of it. Every single time I see someone saying something wrong, I'm going to get in there and start a fight about it. It is not in any shape, form, or fashion effective for convincing the person I'm talking to. But what it does do is it shows the people who are in their orbit, who are potentially, coming closer, to see, wait a second, they're not allowed to say this kind of thing with no pushback. They're not allowed to simply push this as if it is a viable alternative, the homeopathic medicine, or fossil fuel industry propaganda, or whatever. There needs to be pushback. And I think if the scientific community, and they're getting better at it, but if they're not going to be the ones to do it, it falls into the hands of science communicators. It's our job to make sure that the correct information is put into a form that is understandable and available to people, so that can be just as common as the BS that these guys make up on the fly.
Can I piggyback on that for a second? Erica, you've actually said something a couple of times here that I really love, which is the conspiratorial thing. So circling back to evolution denial. So science denial in general follows a familiar pattern.
Yeah.
John Cook and various others so John Cook has the acronym FLICC. FLICC stands for FLICC. Fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories. So if you learn that pattern, then you can start to recognize it in other forms of denial. I missed your pre-bunking panel yesterday with Sander van der Linden and others. His work parallels John's, and we actually all work together in the Mental Immunity Project. The idea here is that if we want to pre-bunk, we want to help people understand, in this case, how science denial works, why you might fall for it, teach them this pattern in a way that's not triggering, and then help them graduate to the forms that are more triggering so that they can see it in the other areas of science denial. And for all of them, conspiracy theories underlie them. This is true in pseudoscience. So I distinguish pseudoscience from science denial in that pseudoscience is something that we want to believe, so our standard of evidence is very low. Science denial is something we don't want to accept, so evidence is impossibly high. Nevertheless, no matter what it is, even fake news.
No.
What?
Is she frozen for you guys too?
Nope, you're good.
So the idea here is that for all of these things that we don't want to accept, Conspiracy theories underlie them. They are literally the only way to explain why all of the world's experts disagree with the position. And the conspiracy has to grow larger and larger and larger to encompass all of the experts that disagree with us. So helping people recognize in themselves, what do I want to believe or not want to believe and why? What is the expert consensus on this? What are the techniques of this form of misinformation? So to me, when I talk about like drilling down to the root form here of the helping people think through these issues better, it underlies that the surface issue is important. Climate change denial, vaccine denial, whatever it is. But if I start with that, people are just going to get triggered and they're not going to hear me. So what I want to do instead is help people understand their own thinking. What do I want to believe? Why do I want to believe it or not? The characteristics of various forms of misinformation, in this case, science denial, teaching them flick, for example, doing so in a way that is not triggering, and then helping them practice that. I call it critical thinking training wheels, practice that thought process so that they can get to a point where, you know what, I actually care about aligning my beliefs with what's true. How do we know what's true in this area? Why might I be deceiving myself? How are the techniques of that form of misinformation potentially misleading me? All of that is a lot of work. It's really hard. But to me, like I don't know if there's a shortcut for all of that.
Could you do that wonderful acronym again? Spell that for me, FLICC.
So FLICC, fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations.
Hang on. You're writing faster than I can do. Impossible expectations. Yeah, okay. Good. That's yeah. And then the 2 C's?
And conspiracy theories. By the way, John Cook, he's an Australian like you, Karl. He's actually from Melbourne. He works at the University of Melbourne. He has a game called Cranky Uncle. Mm-hmm. This game is fantastic. Cranky Uncle is a science denier. In particular, he denies climate change, although there's a new version on vaccines. Cranky Uncle is a climate change denier, and Cranky Uncle uses the techniques of science denial to convince you, like, you know what, it's cold outside, so there's no climate change. Or like this one conspiracy or expert says that climate change isn't happening, or like the models aren't 100%, so we don't know anything. So Cranky Uncle uses those techniques, and this is a free game. It's online. It's brilliant. You learn the techniques in the process. You piss off Cranky Uncle. He gets crankier and crankier, and then you unlock new levels, and it's so fun and engaging. But the best part of this is pre-bunking. Mm-hmm. The best part of something like this is it's teaching you how science denial works. In this case, with climate change, but all science denial uses that form. Vaccine denial, evolution denial, GMO denial, all of them rely on these same techniques. So it provides a bigger umbrella of protection because you can start to see how those techniques are used in various forms of misinformation.
And one of the things that you just touched on was the whole engagement, right? We had learned, there were studies talking about the whole QAnon thing, that one of the things that made it attraction was the gamification aspect of it and that engagement. And that's why I think what you guys do on social media is so important, because you directly engage. And that's why I'm hoping that we get more of not only you guys, but we get more people who are like you, who do directly engage and make it interactive and that type of thing to, again, help combat this misinformation. I guess we have a few questions that are coming in. So if Jason wants to get them to us, I know our audience is really excited. Okay, so from Jeannie Scott. Hi, Jeannie. You've talked much about dealing with controversial issues, but we also need to reach people about science that isn't problematic. What works best for teaching uncontroversial science online?
So my go-to for this, again, because YouTube is where I dwell, but similar channels or like accounts exist on TikTok and Instagram. there are wonderful content creators out there who create these crash courses, and Crash Course, the YouTube channel, is actually one of them. But these excellent courses that that create subjects and sort of break them down to their most digestible chunks, right? So like Crash Course will have an entire series on genetics, and then they'll tackle genetics from the ground up as if you were a curious 10-year-old, right? Or they'll do it with evolutionary biology or with economics or whatever. And the nice thing about them is they actually work great if you need like a quick brush up on a subject. So you can just like put it on, and each video is 10 minutes. So they tackle key concepts in 10-minute bite-sized portions. So I think that's a phenomenal resource as far as like entire subjects go. And then there's wonderful science communication, at least on YouTube, through things like PBS Eons that will tackle like cutting edge papers and like take them and put them into a form that you can easily consume and then explain to other people, and they explain why it's neat and the implications for it. And the best part is, they bring people on who are experts in that subject, because we were talking earlier about how everybody's got these regions of ignorance, right? And there's this cult of the death of expertise here in the West, where it's like there's an Isaac Asimov quote, to throw my quote abilities into the ring, where he says something to the akin to, the cult of ignorance has allowed us to believe that, someone's opinion is the same as like an expert's experience, or something along those lines. I've butchered it, of course. But it is important that we have trust and faith in the experts and have them come and explain what it is that they do, because one, it reveals to us why these fields are important and how much sort of gusto it takes to get to that point. But it also takes it down from the ivory towers, right? And it puts it into a realm where anybody, because that's what knowledge is for, it's for everybody, can access it and sort of be a part of the fun of discovery and the joy of curiosity. So I think YouTube is great for that, because these bite-sized videos are incredible for being the hook, as we talked about earlier. But YouTube is wonderful or Khan Academy is also great as like a free resource to access this. And this kind of perks my memory, because we talked back about how we're bringing other people into this, and like through my time on YouTube, and I'm sure it's the same on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, it's like I've met so many incredible other science communicators who I can collaborate with and who I can call on when I need their expertise, right? So geneticists or geologists or whatever, who I can reach out to, and forming that kind of community is not only incredible to have sort of behind the scenes, but it's also cool for the general public to see that, like scientists collaborate with each other because we're aware of our own ignorance and of our own limitations, such as the beast. So I would point to wonderful YouTube channels for basic understanding of non-controversial science topics.
Dr. Karl.
I'd like to know where I can do Melanie's course online.
Yes. So okay, that's a good point. And I was going to get there. So if there's anything that you guys would like to pitch, and let us know how we can find you. And before I do that, I want to say thank you again so much for you guys coming here today. And for our viewers, this is recorded. The whole conference is recorded. So if you missed Jeannie's panel, like Melanie was concerned about, if you have the link, you're paid, you can watch it. It will be recorded. But yes, so please, let's go around and give me where we can find you. So Melanie, if you want to start.
I just got to say, Dr. Karl, you made my day. Thank you so much. I don't want you as a student in my class, though.
I think I need to be a student, because there's certain things you've talked about that I realise I had no idea of, and I'd like to fill in those gaps.
Oh my goodness, I'm so beyond humbled. Well, let me just say, so I have a website, thinkingispower.com, and I'm at Thinking Powers on social media. Thank you.
And Dr. Karl, I know you've got a lot of projects, but on social media, where are the main ones we could find you?
Just go to drkarl.com, drkarl.com. And if anybody's got any school-age children, I do free science Q&As around the world all the time, and normally send them a couple of $100 worth of my books for free as well. So just go to my website and you'll find somewhere there, drkarl.com, it's all there.
And you have a new book coming out soon, right?
Yeah, modestly in autobiography. It took a lot of time to do it. I was told to leave out the bit where I overtook the cops at 85 miles an hour in the middle of the city. And but I did keep in the bit where I smashed up 6 cars in one night.
Oh boy. Erica, on that note.
Well, I don't know if mine's as cool as that. But you can find me Gutsick Gibbon on YouTube. Same on Twitter. I'm also looking forward to checking into Melanie's course, because Flick is something that, it's funny that Dr. Karl was like, wait, say it again, because I need to write it down. Because my first thought when you started going through the acronym was, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so useful. I need to remember this so that I can Google it later. I didn't even think I can just pull out a pen and paper and write it down. I was just like, I'll remember it. It's okay. But that's because you really hit the nail on the head with that. And it actually really kind of weirdly elucidated quite a few things for me, like all at once. So I really appreciate that as well. And I'm sorry for interrupting you earlier. My service like cut and you were like still for me. And so I was like, is anybody else saying that she's not moving? But I was the only one for who you were frozen for. So I'm sorry for like outbursting. I very quickly just like switched my Wi-Fi, but gotta address the elephant in the room.
Oh yeah, you're in the field, and we totally understand that. And if I may talk about, Melanie, your Flick chart that you talked about, I had the honor of doing a workshop for Ollie at the University of Pacific, which is for lifelong learners, our older learners. And Melanie had graciously let me use her graphics and stuff. And I have to say, even though our learners are, a lot of them have educational backgrounds like administrators, professors, etc., that was accessible. So that's exactly what you guys do. It's relatable and it's accessible to people who may not have a science background, and that's why I'm so grateful for all the work that you guys do on social media. And you guys give me hope. A lot of us talk about the misinformation, tsunami, and what have you, but because of people like you and the people that you're mentoring and that are going to come after you, I mean, we have hope, right? And that makes me so happy and grateful for what you guys do. And any parting words of wisdom? And well, I guess we're running out of time, but thank you again, everyone. I can't thank you enough. And thank you for all our Skeptical attendees for being here. And enjoy the rest of the day. It's great to have you.